Hi everyone, welcome to week 6, our second to last week in the course. This week we're going to be discussing feminist and reconceptualist theories in early childhood education. And we're going to be drawing again on our textbook Beyond Quality, chapter 5. And we'll also be reading an article by Mindy Blaze about interfering in gender development through a post-foundational lens. So, borrowing from Sarah Ahmed, feminism is about asking questions about the ways in which many people assume things have always been done, and asking questions that make visible the social structures and systems which then create hierarchies of normalcy and how these structures remain justified as neutral and acceptable, often to those who benefit from them. So feminism has been traced as moving through 3 waves which are intimately related to the sociocultural milieu in which they took place. So first wave feminism took place during the 19th century and focused on the argument largely that women are actually human, that they have the right to own land, that they have the right to vote, and the right to not be legally owned as property of their husbands. Second wave feminism took place during the 1960s to 80s and highlighted more the social inequities and discriminative forces of oppression that operate via systems of normativity. So there was a focus on how societal structures and norms are highly gendered and sexualized, and that these social structures don't only operate out there, but they also operate internally. So women's identities are thus performative as women make sense of who they are, their desires, how they ought to act in relation to dominant ideologies, about what it means to be a woman and what counts as womanhood, and also what it means to be a human in a particular social and cultural context. So second wave feminism is often referred to as the age of consciousness raising, largely where women started paying attention to the privileges and power that become accessible when someone touches or comes close to the ordinary. It questions what counts as a human, and in the thickness of patriarchal hegemonic society, who is the human subject? And this is what is meant by the phrase that emerged in that time, that the personal is political. And as Sarah Ahmed writes this week, even desire and the concept of happiness, as she says in the video, is also constructed within patriarchal structures where the good life or the happy life is attached to an idealized image that is rooted in white heterosexual love and nuclear family life and autonomy within capitalist society. And that determines what a successful life is and how someone reaches that place. Yet the structures that uphold and contribute to these ideologies are not often seen as problems, because people who fall outside of the norm or make visible the norm by challenging it become the problem. Thus, bodies who point to or name what is really a socially discursive social problem become burdened as the problems themselves. So if you highlight a problem, you then become the problem. So much feminist scholarship from the second wave has been really critiqued as ignoring race and socioeconomic status and class as huge factors in social hierarchies and oppression and colonialism. That the voices and problems that surfaced that time were mainly from white middle to upper class women, and continued to ignore stories of racialized women and indigenous issues on the land in which they protested. So feminist scholarship now has expanded immensely to attend to the ways in which feminist theory is not only about gender, but it's also very much about race, class, ability, bodies, and land. So much 21st century feminist theory has also committed itself to unsettling the patriarchal structures of thought that framed the construction of the modern school. And as you've read this week, during the Enlightenment period, particular ways of knowing were privileged in early scholarship and study. Scientific reason and a separation of the human from the living world in motion under the guise of objectivity placed the male human as superior to nature and ecology. And as men classified and categorized the world into knowable forms and structures, social hierarchies were then formed not only in academic disciplines with regard to what counts as knowledge, but also social hierarchies of plant and animal life that place the white-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual male at the pinnacle of this tier. So, drawing on ecofeminist scholar Val Plumwood, these structures of human life are also deeply informed by long colonial histories of Judeo-Christian governance and morality, where man was above woman, woman over child, and human over land and nature. So these ways of knowing had and continue to have significant social implications in terms of how many settler colonial states are organized, especially in terms of the displacement of indigenous peoples and knowledges. And these feminist ideologies very much inform a lot of reconceptualist work in the field of education. So taking on a post-structural feminist theoretical perspective in a way that we're not making additions or changes to a current system, as Sarah Ahmed highlighted in her talk, reconceptualist theorists wish to fundamentally reconfigure and reconceptualize educational projects by highlighting their colonial roots and rationalities and radically unsettling and re-articulating what education is for, and with that, how educational projects are formed. As Ahmed discusses, language and concepts are acts of world making. They're part of the phenomena of world making. That words are part of a lineage of philosophical thought and theory, and that language really matters. Language often becomes so normalized that we may not notice what it actually tells and what the histories are that are carried along with these particular words. So reconceptualist post-structural theory highlights that language is not only communicative, but language creates worlds and how we come to understand ourselves within these worlds. So for example, languages that contribute to the construction of the child, as we've been discussing, matter. So if I'm using language that comes from behaviorist orientations like 1, 2, 3 magic, or the zones of regulation that's very popular right now, self-regulation strategies, mindfulness. If I organize children's groupings according to age, or how we line up to come inside from recess break or something like that, I'm carrying with me discourses of developmentalism and behavioral conditioning forward. These languages frame how I make sense of the world and also how I see children, how I understand the construction of knowledge. So when I use particular words, they're never empty. They always come from some theoretical background. So early childhood education is full of these languages. Children are sponges, children are free, children are innocent, vulnerable. We often paint children as romantically closer to nature. All of these phrases and languages that run through the early childhood institution come from somewhere, and that's what we've been reading about a lot in this book, Beyond Quality, especially last week. So these languages become part of institutionalized discourse that create then what these institutions do and how they perform in relation with social discourses. So something that I want you to take away from this course is that nothing that we do or say in our practice with children are neutral. Everything comes from somewhere. So even if you think that you're making a choice that isn't theoretical or that is atheoretical, it always comes from somewhere. Everything that we do and don't do has a theoretical vantage point. So reconceptualist theory challenges a structural emphasis on skills-based prescriptive learning And many scholars in this area argue that a focus on skills that's very common in education is actually an expression of modernity's obsessions with instrumentality and functionality that make working through colonial pasts ultimately impossible. And in our article this week that we're reading by Mindy Blaze, she writes, quote, that in taking up, or not quote, sorry, I'm about to tell you a quote. In taking up reconceptualist theory or post-developmental theory, it doesn't mean that we're totally expunging ourselves from all modernist or developmental thinking. She writes, quote, post-developmentalism doesn't deny children's development so much as complicate and interrogate it. It's a move from relying solely on developmental discourse to understand gender in the context of this article. It intentionally makes room for other perspectives that are useful for illuminating aspects of children's subjectivity, end quote. So with regard to curriculum reform, reconceptualist theorist William Pinar argues that one element, that is the structure of education, can't be cast as the key contributor to educational accomplishment or change. Pinar takes a critical look at curriculum using queer theory, as does Mindy Blaze in this article. And queer theory is a branch of feminist theory which deconstructs common assumptions about gender, race, sex, class, to explore the racialization and gendered nature of power, to question who's making decisions in education and how are these decisions taking shape. So Pinar argues that schools have been configured as an ahistorical neoliberal concept, and its spaces are defined as a blank slate. Pinar critiques his predecessors for articulating reform in terms of structure, of the broader needs of society and the economy, because attending to these needs quickly turns into generalizations that continue to fall back into the dominant Euro-Western system, a sort of well-oiled machine. So Linda Tuhiwai-Smith is an Indigenous Maori scholar from New Zealand who speaks about this in detail when she says that the West has archival rules of practice, which the West itself cannot necessarily describe because it operates within the rules, within these very rules, and take them for granted because they're unnoticed. The state functions in ways which allow small shifts and transformations to happen, but without changing the archival structure itself. So in response, she moves towards decolonization as an effort in unsettling these histories and how they continue to perpetuate education today. So reconceptualist early childhood scholar Veronica Pacini-Cacciabau has written about immigration in early childhood education literature, and she's critiqued the concept of Canada as a welcoming multicultural country. She considers how it is that the state actually creates migrants, and she speaks about the migrant as a phenomena, how it becomes a problem to be dealt with. So in Canada, the state is assumed as a benevolent manager of immigrants and sort of a neutral palette to accommodate the colors of many people in this tapestry that is multicultural Canada. However, Pacini-Cacciabau argues that it may not be this simple, that border imperialisms are more than merely markers of territory. They're structures of the state that create and recreate subjects. And these markers of territory are performative, much like the language that Sarah Ahmed argues. These concepts and these borders, these languages are not static. They contribute in the creation of assumptions and how subjectivities are produced.